So, Andy, the first time that we got to do a segment on this show together, one of our talking points was a misconception in college football around Texas. And we're not talking about Texas this very second per se, but I thought this was a great time heading into week one to maybe unpack some things that feel like a narrative in college football that we can let the people know, hey, don't buy that. Don't believe that. That's a misconception. Lock in right here on what is true when it comes to college football. So we're going to kind of go back and forth here and each give two, but I want to tee you up to give your first misconception because I think it's a good one. I think it's one that people need to hear.
Alabama does not need to know who their QB1, the starter for the whole year, is by the Texas game. If they're still trying to work some stuff out, it's not the end of the world. And I know the thought is they're playing Middle Tennessee, so you can play Jalen Milroe, you can play either Ty Simpson or Tyler Buckner, you can kind of figure it out, and whoever you start against Texas is the guy. And hopefully that's how it works out for them. Hopefully it's that convenient and that buttoned up and somebody really just surges forward and takes the job. But if that doesn't happen, it's not the end of the world. If you don't know by the end of the Texas game who your guy is, if you've had to play two guys in the Texas game, not the end of the world. Now, it might mean you don't win the Texas game, but again, that does not keep you from winning the SEC. It doesn't keep you from making the college football playoff. It doesn't keep you from competing for a national title. So I would say, more realistically, Alabama needs to know who that person is by the Ole Miss game. That's game 4. So you've got Middle Tennessee, you got the Texas game, then you have that how did this game get scheduled game in Tampa against USF, then Ole Miss. So by the time Ole Miss comes to Tuscaloosa on September 23rd, you need to know who that guy is. I don't think you have to know when the Longhorns show up.
There's a part of that, too, where you could play two guys in the Texas game like you were talking about and get the production you need to still win that game. I mean, if defense does their thing, Jalen Milroe goes for like 100 yards on the ground, let's say, and Ty Simpson's throwing the ball well. Like, there's definitely a 2-quarterback system that could work for Alabama to still get done what they want to get done in that game.
Yeah, our conventional wisdom is that this is going to be a more old school type Alabama team where they do rely more on the defense. The scores are lower. They try to eat up a little more clock in the run game. There's no reason why you can't win that game playing two quarterbacks. Now, Texas is very good. They're very talented, and you saw them push Alabama to the absolute limit last year. If Texas is firing on all cylinders, you better have good quarterback play if you want to beat them. But if your defense is playing well, then yeah, you probably still have some room to experiment, and then you reevaluate. You play USF, a team you should definitely beat, and then you go into a stretch of SEC games that goes Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Texas A&M. You do need to know by that point because that's where things could get dicey because those games, the effects of playing teams like that are cumulative.
That would just be such a wild storyline if we get into the Ole Miss game and we still don't know who's playing quarterback for Bama. But it would just be like college football for us to get a storyline like that. Andy, I want to go from one coast to the other, and I've kind of been beating this drum, really, I guess, since media days. We need to all go to our local grocery store. I know on the West Coast they do Major Market and Albertsons. We got to stock up on all the caffeine we can because there's going to be some really good football games played that are kicking off at 10 Eastern. Some people think the Pac-12 is like a weak conference just because you don't have teams consistently going to the college football playoff like you do the SEC and the Big Ten. But, man, I mean, USC, Oregon, Washington, Oregon State. I mean, I haven't talked about Utah, who's won the conference the last 2 years. Like, you could sell me on any one of those 5 teams handling the Pac-12 and finding a way to at least, maybe not Oregon State probably just Oregon State from that group I wouldn't buy as a college football playoff
Oregon
contender.
State's schedule is the easiest of those. That's the thing.
It's a reality. There's good football played on the West Coast, Andy. And I don't think people talk about it enough.
Let me throw you another one. UCLA can beat any of those teams you mentioned.
Yep.
Now, is UCLA going to win the league? Probably not. Are they going to play a role in who does win the league? I think it's entirely possible. And that's why the Pac-12 is going to be a whole lot of fun to watch. And, yeah, we're going to be up late, brew the coffee, get a whole pot going because I don't know who it's going to be. If you told me the Pac-12 championship game is some combination of USC, Oregon, Washington, Oregon State, Utah, or UCLA, I would not be shocked. If you told me that Arizona jumped up and bit one of those teams, I wouldn't be shocked. Mm-hmm. So It's probably the most, competitively deep conference in the country this year. The Big 12 is still going to be pretty competitively deep as well in terms of how close, the number 6 team is to the number 1 team. But I just think it'll be so much fun. And there's so many good quarterbacks in that league.
If for no other reason, if you just want to watch a good quarterback play, Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., Caleb, we could just go down the list here. Cam Rising when he's healthy, absolute clinic in good quarterback play going on right around 10 Eastern for a lot of the good folks on the Eastern time zone. Andy, what is your next misconception when it comes to what college football is going to be here this coming season?
My next one is that the Michigan-Ohio State game is going to determine who wins the Big Ten again and who goes to the playoff out of the Big Ten. Penn State is going to have a say in all of this. I'm telling you right now, they get Michigan in State College. For some reason, they can't play very well in Ann Arbor, but they play Michigan very well in State College. They play Ohio State close everywhere. And there's a level of elite talent at Penn State that we have not seen there in the past few years. They have NFL dudes like Michigan has NFL, maybe not as many as Michigan right now because Michigan has a ton, or like Ohio State has. So, Olu Fashanu at left tackle, Chop Robinson and Abdul Carter rushing the passer. These are guys that Penn State has not had a lot of this. They've had some of this, but not all at once. And Drew Aller, we'll see if he's the missing piece, but he was a 5-star quarterback, has a very high ceiling. The thought is he has a much higher ceiling than Sean Clifford ever did. Now he's got to prove that, but I really like the way this team is put together. And I look at Ohio State and I look at Michigan and I say, you know what? I don't know that there's that big of a gap between them and Penn State anymore.
And the most outside shot, too, to add on to that point, what's Wisconsin going to be? I know it's year one, and I know there's probably still a acclimation period for them. But if you just get them in the door in Indianapolis against any 3 of those teams, potentially Ohio State playing them for a second time, I think that could get very, very fascinating because they got some dudes now. Tanner Mordecai playing quarterback for them. Luke Fickell knows how to win. He's also had a little bit of a head start having coached in the bowl game, which I love that he was just no, I'm not watching. I'm coaching this thing. Let's roll. Wisconsin and Penn State, I think, could factor in 1,000% into that whole conversation for who wins the Big Ten.
Yeah, now Wisconsin's going to get past Iowa. I'll throw a bonus misconception in there. The bonus is we're going to be watching Iowa to see if Brian Ferentz loses his job, and that's they've got to average 25 points a game, or contractually they can axe him afterwards. I don't think that's going to be a problem for Iowa. I think the talent they brought in through the transfer portal, Cade McNamara at quarterback, but also an older, healthier offensive line than they had last year. They're going to be more functional on offense. I don't think 25 points a game as an average is going to be a problem. Maybe the defense isn't quite as dominant as it was, but it's still going to be really good. Phil Parker isn't losing his touch anytime soon. LeVar Woods, the special teams are going to be great. And so we talk about Wisconsin being the team opposite whoever it is in the Big Ten championship game, but Wisconsin's got to get past Iowa first.
Yeah, the Big Ten's pretty deep, team to team. There's a lot of teams that I don't know that, past that top 3 of Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. Wisconsin maybe gets in the conversation, but you're talking about those 3 the most to win the conference. Any given week, there's a fair amount of teams that could ruin your bid at getting to Indianapolis. Last one I want to run by you here, Andy. Kind of staying in that conversation around the Big Ten and the college football playoff. I think there's a misconception that if we get 2 teams into the college football playoff, they have to come from the SEC or the Big Ten if it's coming from the same conference. I'm looking at the ACC, and I'm regardless of what Florida State does week 1, we could see Florida State and Clemson run it back in the ACC title game, and we could see both those teams make it in. I guess Florida State would have to take care of business week 1 there against LSU, but I think there's a path there for them both to find their way in the dance here.
So the way that happens is Florida State winds up being obviously very good and beating LSU. They got to beat LSU. They need LSU to be good too. They need LSU to go on and make a lot of noise in the SEC, perhaps win the SEC West again. Clemson needs to split with Florida State, obviously. They need Notre Dame to stay good, and they need to beat Notre Dame when Notre Dame comes to play them on November 4th. If Notre Dame is a 10-win or 11-win team, which – look, with Sam Hartman, maybe they are. That win for Clemson would look very impressive. Now, it would also help Clemson a lot if South Carolina has a very good year in the SEC. Like if South Carolina is a 9-win team going into that game against Clemson and Clemson beats them, then that's going to look really good too, just as beating LSU would look great for Florida State. So that's the path to that happening. Do I see that happening? No, because it feels like too much has to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. It's not necessarily likely, but we talk about like the Big Ten and the SEC, like they're the only two teams that can get to, or the only conferences that can get two teams in. And to your point, I mean, if they beat an LSU and if Clemson beats Notre Dame and they beat a South Carolina, like there's some juice there on the schedule to where it's at least a conversation on Selection Sunday.
Right.
But regardless,
this is why you play good out of conference games, because if you win them, it gives you bonus points and it gives you room for error. Now, that only gets more incentivized going forward. So hopefully that means more good out of conference games. We'll see if they actually do it.
Well, I was going to say, regardless, it's phenomenal we actually get to start watching games. Like the time for projecting and misconceptions and all that, like we're finally get to see it play itself out on the field. Beautiful thing.
Oh, beautiful.
It's about time. Awesome. Andy, thanks so much, man. We'll do this again real soon.
Thanks, JD.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.